Hello to everyone watching across Africa, and to everyone who still believes this continent deserves the right to shape its own future. There are moments in history when a nation is forced to confront more than a military crisis. Moments when an entire region begins to question who truly controls its destiny. And right now, that moment may be unfolding across the Sahel. Only days after Emmanuel Macron stood beside African leaders at the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi, promising a new partnership between France and Africa, tensions exploded once again in Mali. Airstrikes intensified over KIDAL. Bamako raised its tone. And voices close to the alliance of Sahel states accused France and Western powers of fueling instability behind the scenes. For Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, this is no longer just a security crisis. It is a battle over sovereignty itself, a battle over who defines Africa's future. The old powers of the past or a new generation of African-led alliances determined to break away from foreign influence. But the deeper question is becoming impossible to ignore. Are Western powers truly trying to stabilize the Sahel, or are larger geopolitical interests quietly turning this region into a new battlefield for influence, resources, and strategic control? In this video, we will go beyond the headlines and examine why Bamako believes the Sahel is under pressure from forces far beyond its borders, how AES is responding, and why the outcome of this confrontation could reshape Africa's political future for years to come. Follow the channel if you want to understand Africa through the eyes of Africa itself. The timing of everything has only intensified suspicion inside Mali. At the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi, Emmanuel Macron presented what he called a modern partnership between France and Africa. He spoke about investment, cooperation, and a future built on equality rather than military dominance. France promised billions in economic partnerships while emphasizing that the era of large French military bases in Africa was ending. But in Bamako, many did not hear reassurance. They heard strategy. For officials inside Mali, the message coming from Paris sounded less like a fresh beginning and more like a rebranding of old influence. Almost immediately after the summit ended, the Malian military intensified operations around KIDAL, the symbolic northern city that has become the center of a growing confrontation between Bamako, Tuareg armed factions, and extremist groups linked to JNIM. According to voices close to AES leadership circles, the sudden increase in coordinated attacks against Malian positions is not being viewed as a coincidence. Many in Bamako believe armed groups operating in the north are benefiting from external logistical support, intelligence networks, and international media narratives designed to weaken the new Sahel alliance before it becomes too powerful. For the government of Assimi Goita, KIDAL is not simply territory. KIDAL represents legitimacy. Losing influence there would damage the image of an army that promised to restore sovereignty after years of frustration with foreign-backed security strategies. And that is exactly why the atmosphere inside Mali has become so tense. Supporters of AES now openly argue that the war in the Sahel is no longer just a domestic insurgency. They believe it has evolved into a geopolitical struggle involving global powers, regional interests, and competing visions for Africa's future. At the center of this conflict are two completely different narratives. Western governments often argue that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are moving in a dangerous direction. They claim military rule, restrictions on media, and growing ties with Russia are destabilizing the region even further. But inside the Sahel, many people see the situation very differently. For many supporters of AES, France never truly left Africa. They believe the methods simply changed. Instead of direct military control, they see influence operating through diplomacy, intelligence partnerships, financial pressure, media narratives, and strategic alliances. In this view, the battle for the Sahel is not only happening on the ground, it is also happening on television screens, social media platforms, and international headlines. That is one reason why France 24 and Radio France Internationale became major targets of criticism inside Mali and Niger. Authorities in both countries accused foreign media outlets of shaping international opinion against the new Sahel governments while amplifying narratives that portray AES as reckless, unstable, and authoritarian. The controversy surrounding Ukraine also deepened suspicion. After previous clashes near Tinzaouaten, Malian officials accused foreign actors of indirectly supporting armed factions fighting both Malian forces and Russian personnel. While no definitive public evidence has proven a coordinated Western operation inside Mali, the timing of events continues to fuel mistrust across the region. And in geopolitics, crises rarely appear without interest behind them. At the same time, many African observers also recognize that not every criticism coming from the West is automatically false. the Sahel is still facing deadly insecurity, civilians continue to suffer. Press freedom has become more restricted, and military governments across the region are concentrating enormous power in their own hands. This is what makes the current moment so complicated. For supporters of AES, this alliance represents resistance, a refusal to accept decades of dependency and humiliation. But for critics, it risks replacing one form of foreign influence with another. That debate becomes even more intense when Russia enters the picture. Russia's growing presence in the Sahel has completely transformed the balance of power in the region. After the decline of Wagner operations, Moscow reorganized its security strategy through Africa Corps, a structure much more closely connected to the Russian state. For Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Russia became more than a military partner. It became a symbol that alternatives to Western dependence still exist. Assimi Goita in Mali, Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, and Abdurrahmane Tiani in Niger now present AES as the foundation of a new regional order, an order where African governments cooperate militarily, share intelligence, and defend their own territory without waiting for approval from Paris or Washington. AES has already begun building joint military mechanisms, including coordinated operations and regional rapid response planning. For many supporters across Africa, this looks like the beginning of a new era of strategic independence. But history has taught Africa to remain cautious with every great power. Russia also has interests, strategic influence, access, geopolitical leverage, and many analysts warn that replacing French dependence with Russian dependence would not truly solve the deeper problem facing the continent. Meanwhile, ordinary people across the Sahel continue paying the highest price. Millions have been displaced by violence. Food prices continue rising. Entire communities live between fear of armed groups, military operations, and economic collapse. For civilians in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, sovereignty is not an abstract political slogan. Sovereignty means safety, stability, the ability to live without fear. And now, several possible futures are beginning to emerge. The first is a major military escalation around northern Mali. The second is a stronger and more united AES military alliance. The third is an intensification of diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and information warfare between AES and Western power. And many African nations are watching carefully because the outcome of this confrontation could influence the future direction of the entire continent. What we are witnessing today is no longer just a local conflict inside Mali. It is becoming a geopolitical fault line stretching across the Sahel and far beyond it. A confrontation involving sovereignty, security, resources, foreign influence, and the future direction of Africa itself. The reality is uncomfortable for every side. Western powers speak about democracy and stability, yet many Africans still remember decades of military interventions that failed to bring lasting peace to the Sahel. AES speaks about sovereignty and liberation, yet sovereignty alone will not feed families, protect civilians, or rebuild shattered communities unless it delivers real security and real economic stability. And Russia may present itself as a strategic partner, but history has repeatedly shown Africa that every global power ultimately acts according to its own interests. That is why this moment matters so much. Because the real battle may not simply be over KIDAL, Bamako, or military alliances. The real battle is over whether Africa can finally build a model where decisions about African security are made first and foremost in African capitals. In the coming months, all eyes will remain fixed on the Sahel. Not just to see who wins the next military confrontation, but to see whether AES can transform resistance into lasting stability. Follow the channel if you want to understand Africa through the eyes of Africa itself, because in the next video, we will go deeper into the hidden information war shaping the Sahel crisis and examine how media, intelligence, and geopolitical influence are becoming weapons in a new kind of African battlefield. History does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who understand the rules of the game.